These are your Unit 2 forensic notes on the crime scene and crime scene processing. So crime scene investigation team, the CSI team, includes the first police officer that's on the scene. We call that the responding officer. It also includes any backup police and possibly a district attorney. A district attorney would be called in if they know it's going to be, if it's like a more serious case, like a murder or something like that. Medics will be there to provide any medical help they need. An investigator or a detective. The medical examiner. Medical examiner is only brought in the case of a dead body. A photographer or field evidence technician, as well as lab experts. So that all of those people make up what we call the CSI or crime scene investigation team. All of those individuals must wear protective gear when they are in the crime scene in order to prevent contamination. We don't want to be transferring evidence around different places in the crime scene. All right, so when we talk about processing a crime scene, we're going to focus on something called the 7 S's. So the 7 S's are a series of events. They all happen in this particular order in order to process the crime scene correctly. First is secure the scene, then separate the witnesses, scan the scene, see the scene, sketch the scene, search for evidence, and then secure and collect the evidence. So let's first talk about securing the scene. This is the responsibility of the first responding officer. They must make sure that all individuals in the area are safe. Their second priority is to preserve evidence. So first and foremost, when they arrive to the scene, they're going to see if anybody is injured. If they are, they're going to call for additional medical help. They're going to make sure everyone in the area is in a safe location. Once everyone is safe, then they're going to make sure that no one is entering and exiting the crime scene. So again, obtain medical assistance if it's needed. If there is an obvious suspect on the scene, they will make that arrest right away so that suspect cannot take off on foot. Excuse me. They're also going to isolate the area. So they're going to use police tape, like that yellow crime scene tape, to prevent people from entering and exiting. They're going to remove any unauthorized personnel. So that would be anyone who is not part of the CSI team. They're going to put up either tapes, ropes, other types of barricades, or even position guards so that no one can enter or leave. For the people that do enter and leave that crime scene, they're going to keep a security log of who visits. So the security log is where people literally have to sign in and out saying they have entered and exited the scene, along with the time. They do this in order to prevent any loss of evidence. We don't want people just going in and out like whenever they want, because they could potentially add or remove evidence from the scene. Depending on the type of crime scene that it is, they could also request any additional needs for investigation. For example, if it's an arson, obviously they're going to call like the fire department and a fire investigator, things like that. Different types of crime scenes may need different types of experts for the investigation. So the second thing that's going to happen is to separate the witnesses. This is something the responding officer may also do as they're waiting for other people to arrive. Separating witnesses just means having them stand in different areas, right? We don't want witnesses to be able to talk to one another because it will possibly lead to them creating their own kind of version or story of events that happened. That's called collusion. So by separating them, it prevents them from working together to create a story. We don't want them to trade information. The officer wants to make sure that what one witness saw matches what the other witness saw. So we want to separate them and keep them as, isolated as possible until an officer has a chance to talk to them. All right, after witnesses are separated, then we will be scanning the scene. So this is done by the forensic examiners. So the first 2 steps are done by the responding officer, just regular police officers. These next steps are done specifically by forensic examiners. They're going to scan the scene and see and identify where photos should be taken. They're going to identify any primary and secondary crime scenes. A primary crime scene is where the crime actually happened, right? A secondary crime scene is related to the crime, but not where it actually took place. So, for example, if there's a robbery, the store, for example, that was robbed would be the primary crime scene. The secondary crime scene, if they took like a getaway vehicle, if they got in that car and then abandoned the car somewhere, that would be a secondary crime scene. So it's related to the crime, but it's not where the actual robbery happened. There may or may not be a secondary crime scene depending on what happened. Next is see the scene. So once we have scanned the scene to kind of identify those important areas, the entrance, exit, primary, secondary crime scenes, then that's when the photography unit will come in and actually take photos of the crime scene. So the photography unit is going to take photos of the overall area as well as close-up photos with and without a ruler of particularly of different pieces of evidence and important things. So you can see here is like some drugs. They have a ruler here so they can measure how big the area is. Here is specific evidence they located and they're photographing it. After the evidence and crime scene is photographed, then we will be sketching the scene. On a crime scene sketch, north should always be labeled so that you always want to orient the person looking at the sketch to which direction is north and include some sort of scale of distance, right? This is just a rough sketch, right? It's not done by a particular artist. It's just someone on the forensics team. They're not necessarily, super artistic, but you do need some sort of scale so that they know, like this big on the paper equals 1 foot approximately, so that they get an idea of how big everything should be. All important objects, things like if there's a weapon, if there's a body, should be measured from 2 immovable landmarks. So usually what we do is we measure to one wall and then to the other wall, right? So 2 different walls, because those walls don't move. We're going to measure how far they are from those things so that we know the exact position of it. We're also going to include any other objects in the vicinity of the crime scene. So this could be furniture, it could be windows, doors, all of that would also be included in the sketch. If it's outside, we would want to include any trees or any vehicles. The crime scene sketch is also going to include the date, time, and location of the crime, as well as a case number. It's also going to include names of who sketched it, and it's also going to be verified by another officer on the scene. Just verifying that, yes, this includes everything important. Right? So here you can see an example of a crime scene sketch. They have different furniture placed around. These measurements on the side are providing the scale. So they measured the size of the room, the size of the windows or doors to give an idea of how big the space is. And then let's say this is an object, this couch. They measured the distance the couch was from this wall, the distance the couch is from this wall, the location of this piece of evidence from 2 walls. And they provided a key down at the bottom for what each of those different objects are. So they didn't necessarily draw a gun. They just labeled it A. And then in the key said that A was a gun, for example. Up here, you can see all of that important information, location, case number, who it's sketched by, all of that. And then down here would be where the direction of north as well. All right, once the crime scene is sketched, then we will be searching for evidence. So there are different patterns that can be walked in a crime scene to locate evidence. We want to locate the evidence, photograph it, and then include it on the sketch. So the past couple steps, we may have to go back and forth, right? If we search for evidence and find a new piece, we're going to have to go back and photograph it and include it on the sketch. Then we're going to continue searching for evidence, photograph it, include it on the sketch. So these last 3 we kind of go through continuously as we find more evidence. We may use a flashlight or a black light in order to find trace evidence. Remember, that's a tiny piece of evidence like stray hairs or small samples of soil, things like that. There are different patterns that can be walked. It kind of depends on what the crime scene area looks like and how big it is. So one pattern is a spiral pattern. If there's a dead body in the center of a room, the spiral pattern would be one person walking, in concentric circles around the body to search for any possible evidence. Grid pattern involves multiple officers one starts on one side and kind of snakes back and forth horizontally. Another may start on the north end and zigzag vertically. This is better for a larger area. We also have a linear pattern. This is very similar to grid, except you're only going in one direction. So it'd just be up and down, etc. And then quadrant or zone is what's often used for things like search parties. They will quadrant off or zone off certain areas of land, especially if it's outside, and then divide it into smaller and smaller zones, and then assign a person or groups of people to each smaller area. So they may search just this small quadrant for evidence. This is what they do a lot of times if they have like a large field where they're looking for a body or looking for evidence. This is the easiest way to divide up a very large parcel of land to search for evidence. So we have spiral, grid, linear, and quadrant or zone search patterns. All right, once we have searched the area for evidence, then we want to make sure, again, that it's photographed. We want to make sure it's included in the sketch. Once that is finished, then we can finally secure and collect the evidence, which we talked about a little bit last unit. So remember that all evidence must be properly packaged, sealed, and labeled using specific techniques and procedures. So remember, there's certain ways to package different types of evidence. Oftentimes we will use metal or plastic forceps to pick up small items. You can see like this person here is picking up a hair with a small forceps, not instead of using their fingers, right? They don't want to break it or lose it or anything like that. Small envelopes like this one are preferred for containers preferred containers for things like hair, glass fibers, and other kinds of trace evidence. This is called a bindle. It's made of paper. It's very small, and it's also breathable. So if there is biological evidence on there, that's what we're going to keep it in, because it also has all the information on it really easily. It's easy to store in that size. Remember, any liquid or arson remains have to be stored in an airtight, unbreakable container like this paint can. And then every package of evidence is going to be sealed with evidence tape, and then it will have the evidence log on it as well as the chain of custody. Once all of the evidence is collected, then it will be that's kind of the end of the processing of the crime scene, right? We've done those 7 S's. We've collected all of the evidence at the crime scene. Now that crime scene is going to be basically cleaned up, right? As long as there's no other evidence to collect, we're going to clean up that crime scene. That evidence is then going to be taken to the lab, and it's going to be further analyzed. So the forensics lab is going to process the evidence from the crime scene investigation team. So it's not necessarily the same people. It's usually sent even possibly out of state. The forensic lab technicians are specialized and process only one type of evidence, unlike CSI, where one particular person processes many different types of evidence. A good example of this is the show Dexter, right? In the show Dexter, the main character analyzes blood evidence. He analyzes DNA. He analyzes hair. He does all of it. When in reality, a forensic technician is only going to specialize in one type of evidence. So they may do only DNA evidence or only hair or whatever it may be, only blood, right? They'll just deal with one specific type of evidence. The reason that we go through all of those 7 S's is to allow for the possibility of crime scene reconstruction later on during the prosecution trial phase. So crime scene reconstruction allows detectives to form a hypothesis of the sequence of events before the crime was committed through its commission. So using that crime scene sketch, we know how big the room was. We know where specific things are located. So if a detective gets really stuck in a cold case, they can literally reconstruct what that crime scene looked like, even if it was 10, 15 years later, based on that sketch. That's why that sketch is so important and why it needs to have all those measurements on it. So evidence does not lie, but evidence can be staged. Staged crime scenes, such as a murder set up to look like a suicide, can cause many problems because the evidence doesn't match the testimony of the witnesses. So investigators need to be able to determine if that crime scene is staged. So is this actually a murder, or did the person commit suicide? So these are the kinds of things that we would look for. Initially, we're going to treat all death investigations as homicides. That's the general rule. Until we can rule out a homicide, that's how we're going to treat it. Homicide is another term for murder. We want to make sure that the types of wounds on the victim match the weapon. If we found a gun at the crime scene, does that gun match the kind of wounds that we see on the person? Are the wounds in an area that could be easily self-inflicted, right? There are certain areas where it's difficult to get, a particular angle, for example, or from a particular direction. It may be difficult to do that on yourself versus from someone else. They also are going to create a profile of the victim. So is this likely for the victim to commit suicide? Based on what their friends and family know, like what was that victim like, that can give us clues as to what happened. We're going to look at the behavior of the victim before the event. So their mood, their actions, what were they doing that led up to this incident? And we're going to do the same thing with any suspects. So before the suspect got on the scene, what were they doing? What was their mood like? We may interview their friends and family as well. And then we're going to corroborate statements with evidential facts. So corroborate means to basically support them, back them up. So if a witness says, well, this is the type of gun that was used, but we found a different type of gun at the scene, those do not match, right? We want to make sure if the witness says, I saw him use duct tape, we want to make sure that, oh yeah, we found duct tape on the body, right? We want to make sure that those two things corroborate, that they match. The evidence on the scene matches the statements from the witness. And then we're going to reconstruct the event. So does it make sense for what happened? Can we create kind of a story of what happened based on where the evidence was found? Can we determine exactly what happened? All right, so that's the end of your notes for Unit 2 on crime scene processing. Please make sure to finish your notes and submit them on Canvas.